Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy thought he could humiliate freshman Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett during a heated committee hearing on government spending. But what he did not expect was a single document she pulled out that would expose his hypocrisy in front of millions watching live on C-SPAN. And in the next 30 seconds, McCarthy's face shifted from a confident smirk to stunned silence as Crockett delivered a knockout blow that left the entire room speechless. And this was not just another political showdown in Washington. This was the moment a first-term Democrat from Texas showed the former speaker exactly why underestimating her was the biggest mistake of his political career. Because McCarthy came prepared for a routine attack on Democratic spending, armed with talking points and sound bites that had worked for decades, but instead he walked into a carefully constructed trap that would make him question everything he thought he knew about political warfare as the young Congresswoman had been watching, learning, and preparing for this exact moment for months, gathering documents and building a case that would expose the hypocrisy at the heart of McCarthy's political career. And the camera captured every second as McCarthy's arrogant expression crumbled while committee members on both sides sat frozen as Crockett held up the document that would change everything, and social media exploded instantly with hashtags and clips spreading faster than wildfire in what became political theater at its finest, and McCarthy was about to become the unwilling star of his own downfall. And before we dive into exactly how Crockett destroyed McCarthy's credibility, with surgical precision, the tension in Committee Room 254 was electric as McCarthy walked in with his usual swagger, expecting to score easy points against the Democrats' spending proposals, but he had no idea that Crockett had been waiting months for this exact moment, armed with research that would expose the former speaker's biggest weakness. And what happened next will be talked about in political circles for years to come, because Kevin McCarthy entered that committee room carrying the weight of his recent downfall as House Speaker, but also the confidence of someone who had spent over 15 years in Congress, and at 59 the California Republican, was a master of political theater known for his aggressive questioning style and ability to turn any hearing into a media spectacle, and he had survived countless political battles, from budget fights to leadership challenges, always managing to land on his feet. And McCarthy's strategy was simple and proven effective over the years: attack Democrats on spending, question their competence, and create sound bites that would play well on conservative media. And he had used this playbook successfully against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and dozens of other progressive Democrats. And in his mind, Jasmine Crockett was just another freshman Democrat who would crumble under his experienced pressure. But McCarthy had made a crucial miscalculation, because he was still operating like it was 2015, when a stern lecture from a senior Republican could intimidate a junior Democrat into submission. Yet the political landscape had shifted dramatically, and new members like Crockett came to Congress battle-tested and ready for war, because Jasmine Crockett represented everything McCarthy's old-school approach could not handle. And at 43A, civil rights attorney from Dallas, she had built her career taking on powerful opponents and winning. And before Congress, she had served in the Texas legislature, where she had faced down some of the most conservative politicians in America. And she did not scare easily, and she certainly was not going to be intimidated by a former speaker who had lost his own job due to political incompetence. And Crockett's background as a lawyer gave her a unique advantage in congressional hearings, while other members relied on staff prepared talking points. She knew how to think on her feet, cross-examine witnesses, and most importantly, how to set traps for overconfident opponents, because her legal training taught her that the best defense was often a devastating offense. And she had been preparing for this moment with the precision of a seasoned litigator waiting for the right opportunity to strike. And when that moment came, she did not hesitate. This moment had been building since the day Jasmine Crockett took office, because what made her particularly dangerous was her ability to connect with younger voters and social media audiences. And she understood that political battles were no longer just won in committee rooms. They were won online in viral clips that could reach millions of people within hours. While Kevin McCarthy was still fighting yesterday's battles, Crockett was already planning tomorrow's victory. And the House Committee on Oversight and Reform was meeting to discuss the Biden administration's infrastructure spending, which should have been nothing more than routine political theater, where Democrats would defend the investments, Republicans would attack the costs, and everyone would go home having accomplished nothing meaningful. That was the plan anyway. But McCarthy wasn't even supposed to be the lead questioner that day, yet he had specifically requested time to grill Crockett about her district's infrastructure. project because his communications team had convinced him that taking down a freshman Democrat would be the perfect comeback story after his humiliating removal as Speaker and his staff had prepared a thick folder full of talking points about cost overruns and government waste complete with highlighted sections and prepared follow-up questions. And they had researched every major project in Crockett's district over the past 2 years, searching for anything that could be spun as irresponsible spending or evidence of poor leadership, and the attack plan was methodical, designed to create multiple viral moments that would dominate conservative social media for weeks. But what McCarthy's team had not done was research their own boss's record on the very issues he planned to attack, and that oversight would prove fatal, because this hearing came just weeks after McCarthy's humiliating downfall, a political earthquake that had sent shockwaves through the Republican Party, and he desperately needed a win to restore his credibility and prove he was still a force to be reckoned with in Republican politics, and taking down a freshman Democrat on national television was supposed to be exactly the kind of victory that could rehabilitate his image. But for Crockett, the stakes were different yet equally important because, as one of the few black women in Congress, she faced constant scrutiny and far higher expectations than many of her white male colleagues, and every appearance was a test. Every performance was a chance to prove that she belonged at the highest levels of American politics, and a strong showing against McCarthy would solidify her place as a rising star in the Democratic Party. And the media was watching closely, with C-SPAN broadcasting live, major news networks running cameras in the room, and political reporters live tweeting every exchange, because in the age of viral politics, one powerful moment could define a career, while one mistake could destroy it, and neither McCarthy nor Crockett knew it yet. But they were about to create one of the most memorable moments in recent congressional history, because a former speaker thought he was walking into a routine political ambush, but instead, he was about to become the unsuspecting victim of one of the most devastating takedowns ever captured on live television. As the stage was set, the cameras rolled, and Jasmine Crockett prepared to show Kevin McCarthy why underestimating her was the single greatest mistake he could make, and Kevin McCarthy adjusted his tie, leaned into the microphone, and spoke with the confidence of a seasoned political warrior, unaware that his next few minutes would haunt his career forever. He was a political predator, and he had done this dance hundreds of times before identifying a target, load up the attacks, and watch them squirm under pressure. And today's target was sitting calmly across from him, but he was certain that would change quickly. So when McCarthy leaned into his microphone and began, Congresswoman Crockett, his voice carried that familiar tone of condescension that had intimidated Democrats for years as he said, "I want to talk about the reckless spending happening in your district. The American people deserve answers about how their tax dollars are being wasted on your watch." The room fell silent, except for the clicking of camera shutters, and committee members on both sides straightened in their chairs, sensing that something more than routine questioning was about to unfold, while McCarthy's staff nodded approvingly from the gallery, watching their boss move into full attack mode. He pressed forward, starting with the Dallas infrastructure project, already $50 million over budget, and asked Crockett to explain to the hard-working families at home why they should foot the bill for her district's financial mismanagement. And it was a textbook political ambush, carefully crafted with assumptions to corner her on the defensive and produce a soundbite for conservative media. His team had spent hours preparing the perfect question to make her appear incompetent and wasteful, but Crockett did not take the bait. Instead, she smiled slightly and made a note on the legal pad in front of her, a gesture McCarthy interpreted as nervousness, and he pushed harder, raising his voice with theatrical flair, accusing her office of failing to provide adequate oversight of hundreds of millions in federal funds, and asking if this was the kind of leadership the people of Texas expected from her. And this line of attack was designed to strike every pressure point at once, challenge her competence, question her commitment to accountability, and suggest she was failing her constituents. It was political warfare 101, and McCarthy believed he was executing it flawlessly, with Republican members nodding along and conservative staffers already typing social media captions about their boss's takedown of the freshman Democrat. But seasoned observers in the room noticed something McCarthy did not. Crockett was not showing any signs of distress or breathing was steady. Her posture was firm in her note-taking, deliberate and focused, and these were not the signs of someone overwhelmed by a political ambush. And as McCarthy moved on to the community center project in South Dallas, citing local news reports about delays and budget issues, he asked how she could explain such a failure to the very communities she claimed to represent. His attacks had turned more personal, now aiming not only at her job performance, but at her integrity and commitment to her constituents, and he was clearly enjoying himself playing to the cameras and believing he had built an airtight case against the Congresswoman. But when he finally paused to catch his breath, Crockett looked up from her notes with a calm and focused expression, the kind of unshaken poise that should have been McCarthy's first warning sign, because she had sat through his barrage without flinching, and now it was her turn to speak thank you for those questions, former Speaker McCarthy. She began, her voice steady and respectful, but with an unmistakable edge on the word former, reminding everyone of his recent fall from power, and she added, I appreciate your sudden concern for infrastructure spending and government accountability, and the emphasis on sudden and former was not lost on anyone in the room, and in one sentence Crockett had subtly framed McCarthy as both politically obsolete and opportunistically disingenuous. I would be happy to address each of your points, she continued, but first I think it's important that we establish some context about infrastructure spending and oversight. After all, the American people deserve the full picture, don't they? And McCarthy shifted uncomfortably in his seat, because this was not how his attacks usually played out. Most Democrats would either scramble defensively or lash out in partisan counterattack. But Crockett was doing neither. She was calm, measured, and setting her own agenda. And when she mentioned accountability and oversight, she flipped through her documents and asked if McCarthy had always held himself to the same high standards during his time in leadership. And while it was phrased as a question, everyone in the room knew it was the beginning of a counteroffensive, and McCarthy's staff exchanged uneasy glances in the galleries, suddenly aware that the ground beneath their boss was shifting fast. Of course, McCarthy responded quickly, but his voice had lost the weight of confidence. I have always been committed to fiscal responsibility and government accountability, and that's interesting, Crockett replied as she pulled a specific document from her stack, because I have some questions about your own record on infrastructure spending and oversight, and I hope you don't mind if I ask you to explain a few things to the American people. And at that moment, the room seemed to freeze. Republican committee members stopped nodding. McCarthy's staffers stopped typing. And everyone realized the roles in this hearing had just reversed, because the prosecutor was now the one being cross-examined, and Kevin McCarthy no longer looked like a man in control. That experienced political watchers could see the first signs of panic in Kevin McCarthy's eyes as the heat of the moment finally began to register, and he tried to deflect with a brittle smirk and a voice that carried just a trace too much urgency when he said, Congresswoman, I'm not the one being questioned here today. But Jasmine Crockett was ready for that move, and she replied with a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Actually, I think the American people would be very interested in hearing about your record on the very issues you've raised today, because if we're going to talk about accountability and oversight, shouldn't we look at the full picture? And the committee room went dead silent, with nothing but the soft whirl of camera shutters and the scratch of reporters' pens breaking the stillness. And in that moment, every single person in the room, Democrats, Republican staffers, and journalists alike, understood they were watching something rare and seismic unfold, because Kevin McCarthy, the former House Speaker,